Your compliance is vital to the agenda. To impose global solutions, the leadership needs you to believe in global problems.
Climate change is here, it is terrifying, and it is just the beginning. The era of global warming has ended, the era of global boiling has arrived.
This stuff is so fantastically stupid, it's hard to believe that they're doing it. There is no climate emergency. That is a total scam. If they came out and said, hey, we want to destroy your economy, we want to destroy the middle class of your country, and then ultimately we want to make you a slave to a one-world government, it just wouldn't be as appealing as saying we're trying to save the planet for future generations.
"2024, with the hottest day on record and the hottest months on record, this is almost certain to be the hottest year on record. And the masterclass in climate destruction."
Statements such as that are amplified by emotional footage from all over the world. But is any of it true?
I do not think there's a climate crisis, and I base that on all the evidence and the climate data sets that we build to answer questions just like that. We actually use satellites to monitor the global temperature, the true global temperature of the atmosphere. And we find there is a rise. It's about 1.5 degrees per century, which is certainly something that's manageable and the Earth has seen before. Compared to the 19th century, which was about the coolest century in the past 10,000 years, we're warmer. But we're about the same as we were 1,000 years ago, and certainly cooler than we were about 5,000 to 8,000 years ago.
John Christie is a highly regarded climate scientist who developed the measurement of accurate temperature records using satellites. His evidence is critically inconvenient to the climate change industry.
I'm not popular in most of the climate community, that's for sure, because much of the climate community depends on climate model results. Tens and hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into that industry of climate modeling, and I show, well, you folks have failed. But yet they prop up the entire political world that tends to support this. In 2017, I came to work and there were 7 bullet holes in our office suite. And so some people are pretty upset that the evidence that we build and show that can stand the test of time and can stand up to cross-examination is just not going along with their issues and their desires.
Let's consider these statistics on the Earth's atmosphere. 78% is nitrogen, 21% oxygen, other gases make up less than 1%, and carbon dioxide accounts for a mere 0.04%, the majority of which is natural. Can man-made CO2 really be a problem?
Roy Spencer and I are going on the assumption that all the warming that you see is due to carbon dioxide emissions. And so we find that that's a pretty modest warming. But see, that's a big assumption. Mother Nature is able to warm up the planet without extra CO2. And so we are just saying the worst case scenario is this warming of about 1.5 degrees. And that's certainly not a catastrophe at all.
On the contrary, carbon dioxide is vital for the world's survival. The greater the concentration, the better plants grow. In fact, according to NASA figures, the world has become 14% greener in the last 40 years.
During the last cool period before industrialization, let's say 200 years ago or so, it was below 300 parts per million. And during the ice ages, it was even lower. And that's a dangerous level because plants struggle to survive when the CO2 is at a low level. And so the biosphere becomes less diverse and less available to support the animal life. So low CO2 is not good for the planet as a whole.
Where is the logic then behind the UK's decision to spend £22 billion on facilities to capture carbon? The greatest controversy of all revolves around readings from ice cores. CO2 levels can be measured in bubbles of air trapped in ice thousands of years ago. By aligning this to temperatures, scientists have argued that carbon dioxide is the cause of global warming. However, closer inspection leads to the opposite conclusion.
Once the temperature starts to rise, you will see the carbon dioxide rise about 500 to 1,000 years after. So the CO2 actually lags the temperature changes.
But what of the extreme weather events which are increasing and driven by climate change, according to everyone from the top of the United Nations down? Professor Christie says there is no data to support those claims.
And what we find is that virtually every one of these claims is false. The extremes are not increasing. Hurricanes are not increasing in intensity or frequency. Same with tornadoes or thunderstorms or floods or droughts. It's just going along like it always has with the natural variability.
Why aren't we looking at the surface data sets that are constantly adjusted upwards? Why aren't we looking at the 40.3 record at Conisbee, which the Met Office is very proud of, on July the 19th in 2022? And when we did a freedom of information request at the Daily Sceptic, we found that there were 3 Typhoon jets landing on a runway next to the measuring device, because Conisbee, as they call it, is actually RAF Conisbee. It's a military airport. The temperature lasted for 60 seconds. Sticking a thermometer up the backside of a jet aircraft is not probably scientifically the best place that you can sort of determine temperature measurement, particularly when you then morph it into a global database, which the Met Office has, and then tell dear old Antonio Gutierrez that the globe is boiling. The whole thing is junk.
How we came to the point where we think that we're going to prevent bad weather from happening by eliminating fossil fuels is just about the most nonsensical, illogical thing that I can imagine. And the whole world is caught up in this nonsense.
So how did the carbon story take hold? Meet the man who invented climate change, according to The Telegraph. His name? Maurice Strong, an oil tycoon, a Rockefeller associate, and a man with an extraordinary talent for moving between high finance, politics, and the United Nations. Strong was a member of the highly influential Club of Rome, an institution formed in 1968 at a Rockefeller property on Lake Como in Italy. A group of scientists, academics, and industrialists discussed what they saw as an urgent crisis: the impact of human activity on the planet.
I don't think we can sustain current growth trends much beyond, say, the lives of children who are being born today.
To prove the thesis, they commissioned computer modeling at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. This research laid the foundations for an agenda that's persisted for over 50 years.
Cut use of autos, use less electric power, have fewer children, limit growth.
All of this was fueling this ideology that there's too many people on the planet, there's not enough resources, and that something has to be done.
The natural world in which man lives and on which he depends is indeed deteriorating, is being destroyed in many instances at a rate that is accelerating, and that can only continue to accelerate unless we begin to control the activities that are having this destructive impact.
In 1975, the Club of Rome published a second report, Mankind at the Turning Point. The lead quotation was telling.
The world has cancer, and the cancer is man.
The report concluded,
the solution of these crises can be developed only in a global context with full and explicit recognition of the emerging world system, a new world economic order, and a global resources allocation system.
In other words, technocracy, top-down control of everything, including populations. But if that was the solution, a worldwide problem was required. Climate change provided the answer, as admitted in a later Club of Rome document.
This is the quote from page 115. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, And it is only through changed attitudes and behaviour that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. It really does look as though they are inventing climate change there.
They just made it up out of thin air, literally. That nobody really looks at that book and say, well, there you go. It's not, this has nothing to do with science whatsoever. They just made it up.
Interestingly, in 1988, Maurice Strong had been instrumental in establishing the IPCC, the mainly political entity which endorsed a thesis by a small group of scientists that industrial carbon dioxide was driving climate change, and the IPCC has been locked into that theory ever since. Maurice Strong's masterstroke came in 1992, when as Secretary-General of the UN's Earth Summit in Brazil, he saw 179 nations commit to a World Action Plan, Agenda 21.
We have been the most successful species ever. We are now a species out of control.
Nobody would question the need for a cleaner environment and the protection of nature, and Strong's legacy lives on through the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Accord, the current Agenda 2030, and the worldwide push for carbon net zero. But there are questions on his motives and his connections. He was behind the first financial carbon market and a founding director of the World Economic Forum. Surely a conflict of interests with his involvement in the IPCC.
A skeptic might ask why nearly all research grants in almost 40 years have gone on developing IPCC carbon dioxide theories, while anyone who raises questions is ridiculed, cancelled, or has their career stalled.
For someone who wants to determine the natural variability of the climate system as an explanation for what has happened is just not there. I mean, the government is very clear that they want a catastrophic story.
There is no single science paper that proves conclusively that humans control all or most of the global climate. If there was, you wouldn't hear the last of it. Instead, we get this call to authority to the IPCC, the United Nations Panel on Climate Change.
Many more scientists and academics are speaking out against the IPCC. Almost 2,000 have signed a declaration stating that there is no climate emergency, including Nobel Prize winner Professor John Clauser, who wrote,
"The popular narrative about climate change reflects a dangerous corruption of science that threatens the world's economy and the well-being of billions of people."
We need to have a full and honest debate about the science, and it needs to be discussed in Parliament, it needs to be discussed in the media, it needs to be generally discussed, and we need to sort of bring the drains up, if you like, on all of the science to see what is there really a threat.
That debate is highly unlikely, because the juggernaut of net zero careers on, with trillions at stake. What is certain is that the repercussions will affect the food we eat, ravage our countryside, and have a disastrous impact on our energy supply.
You cannot set a credible course for net zero with 2025 and 2030 targets covering all your operations. You should not be in business.
Well, net zero is insanity. It's pure insanity. I mean, the idea that you can remove 85% of the world's energy, which comes from hydrocarbons, within less than 30 years and replace it with the sunbeams and the breezes. It shows a complete lack of economics, societal effect. It shows a simple lack of the progress that we've made over 300 years.
Nevertheless, net zero is enshrined in UK law, with the government passing the Climate Change Act in 2008. A 100% reduction in emissions by 2050 from 1990 levels was included later in a strategy document. But experts argue that the policy is fatally flawed.
Europe's mad dash towards net zero is effectively economic suicide. Politicians are purposely impoverishing ordinary people, purposely deindustrialising Europe, where companies are forced to move to countries where they have access to cheap energy, whether it's the US who frack and therefore have cheap gas, or whether it's to China, which is still predominantly producing from non-renewable, especially coal. It is literal economic suicide.
China continues to open new coal-fired power stations to drive the factories that manufacture wind turbines and solar panels, which are then sold to the West. As a result, China emits almost 30% of global greenhouse gases, while the UK is responsible for less than 1%. In essence, carbon emissions are merely transferred to another part of the planet, and while China gets richer, UK households face a bleak and expensive future.
What it will effectively do is price ordinary people out of having access to electricity at a time they want, and a price they can afford.
The core problem is that neither the infrastructure nor the technology exist to provide a constant supply of electricity.
The proportion of time that solar actually generates electricity is actually 9% in the UK. That means that for 90% of the time, solar doesn't generate the average amount of electricity that its capacity can generate. For onshore wind, it's about 20 to 40%, and for offshore wind, it's about 30 to 50%. So that means by definition, you will always have periods of time when renewables aren't producing electricity, but there is demand for electricity.
As we'll hear, the net result is that supply will be rationed. Reality, though, seems not to concern the activists.
I look at some of these hysterical youngsters and some of the hysterical oldsters as well, screaming about the climate is collapsing and all that sort of thing. And you think you haven't got a clue what would happen if you removed hydrocarbons. You haven't got a clue. You'd be back in service, like probably your ancestors were. You'd be skivvying on the land, in big houses with warlords, calling themselves aristocracy and all that sort of stuff. You want to go back to that? Fine. Get rid of hydrocarbons.
Many of these apparently grassroots protest groups are backed by organisations such as the Climate Emergency Fund, financed by billionaires like the oil heiress Aileen Getty. And if they claim to be environmentalists, they conveniently ignore the bigger picture. Thousands of wind turbines are disrupting coastal waters, changing habitats, affecting marine life, and killing seabirds. Landscapes are being scarred by the production of lithium for electric car batteries, and by cobalt mines in Africa, where child labour contributes to huge corporate profits. How does the loss of thousands of square miles of farmland to vast solar parks meet the UN's biodiversity goal? And how helpful are wind turbines when they're blotting the landscape visually and through noise pollution, and disrupting wildlife in the air and on the ground? The glorious mountain terrain of southwest Wales is a stark example. It's a landscape breathtaking in its beauty, untainted and largely untouched by humans. A haven for wildlife, a place where life runs its natural course. Yet this is what's planned: mega turbines designed for offshore, reaching 700 feet into the air and dwarfing the hilltop forests. Planning permission is being sought for the so-called Bryn Cadwyn Energy Park.
If you put one in the valley floor, it would be standing some 40 metres above the valley floor, so above the horizon. But they're not putting them in the valley floor, they're putting them on the top of the hills. So it'll be standing some 600 odd metres above sea level up there, casting a shadow over our solar panels.
Justin Cotter lives right in the centre of the proposed development. He's fighting to preserve the countryside he loves. And across the mountain, Jason and Josie Barker are equally aggrieved.
It feels very much like it's exploitation, using the climate crisis narrative as its supporting evidence, so it feels like it's being abused in a tremendous way, and there's going to be a lot of destruction done in the name of doing good, which really just seems utterly backwards. And if we really want to protect nature, then some of the best way of doing that would be to leave it well alone, especially in the wilder places, and let it flourish. We certainly found that being here. The more we've lived here, the more we've worked with it and encouraged it, the more it's come back. All of those spruce trees on top there, they will have to go to make way for turbines. All of that. All of this spruce will be gone.
To build a 230-metre turbine in that location, it's going to take some crane to lift the 240-ton nacelle onto the top of the tower some 180 metres up. So they'd have to stabilise all the ground for the crane, stabilise the ground for the actual turbine, put in a concrete plug basically in the ground of some 1,000 tonne of steel, 4,000 tonne of concrete, just as a base.
They'll need to be lit. It'll take away the dark skies.
It's totally devastating. It would just be catastrophic damage and destruction.
The roadways up through these valleys, they're Welsh valleys, they're all twists and turns. They're going to have to straighten out the valleys. Where you've got steep hills, they're going to have to level out those hills. There's a 200-metre drop into the actual valley itself. So they're going to have to create gradients that machinery carrying 400-tonne loads can actually traverse and get up.
The locals argue that there are much better ways of creating clean energy, such as solar panels on industrial sites. Areas of natural beauty should be respected.
This is about preserving and protecting this sacred land. We need to speak up and protect the environment.
It's just tremendous amount of damage in the name of saving the planet. It does make you ask the question of what is it we're actually saving if we're paving it over. It doesn't make any sense at all in my head.
Proliferation of turbines and solar panels certainly seems at odds with protecting biodiversity, and experts argue that the economics simply don't add up.
If we are going to go on to full net zero, we not only have to change our electrical system, but we have to change the other 66% or more of the rest of our energy needs as well. So we need to triple the amount of renewables just to cover our present electricity generation. And then we need to triple again to cover all of the other usages like, transport, space heating, and industry. So it's almost a tenfold increase in the amount of renewable energy that we're producing.
Ralph Ellis has analysed 3 government reports and says all have grossly underestimated costs. 2 of the reports ignore the need for that crucial backup when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. At present, this is the only such site, Dinorwig in Wales. But going by the government's own figures, Ellis says the equivalent of 2,000 Dinorwigs would be required. The overall cost would run into trillions of pounds.
It's an energy fantasy because none of this has been thought through.
Battery plants are one alternative to back up the national grid, like this one already constructed in Australia. But again, they offer limited supply. We're facing a situation where, if fossil fuels are eliminated, it will be impossible to maintain a constant supply of electricity.
You can't instantly put on new supply, so what you have to do is control demand. And to be honest, they're quite open with this. If you look at the National Grid's latest paper on this, they talk about demand management. And the system is, electricity will only be available at a price you can afford when the wind is blowing and when the sun is shining. And when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining and the 1 or 2 hours of battery storage have been used up, the way they will reduce demand is by simply increasing the price of electricity so that demand falls to the available level of supply. Part of the control that the government has, or part of the means by which it can manage the demand, is through the use of smart meters. Effectively, smart meters allow them to do minute-by-minute pricing, which means that as the intermittent renewable production goes up and down, they can effectively change the price at which you can use electricity. So essentially, it's going back to pre-industrial age where the weather determines our lifestyles and our energy use.
A government-sponsored report from the UK Fires Organisation agrees that targets will not be met and therefore electricity usage will have to be cut.
They say we'll have a quarter of the power by 2050, and they say there'll be no travel, there'll be no meat or no beef lamb, there will be restrictions on clothing, and we will live in mud huts. And it's not an exaggeration, they use the word earth. The United Nations use the word bamboo, impacted earth, soil detritus. This is what they're writing.
But what of the claim that renewable energy will be cheaper? Not so, says Derek Bertelsen.
We can also look at the accounts of these renewable energy companies. And what we see if we look at those is that the cost of production is considerably higher than the market price of electricity. And therefore, without these subsidies, these renewable companies would go bust.
Ironically, the anticipated reduction in supply comes at a time when demand is about to skyrocket, with the explosion of surveillance systems and artificial intelligence. BlackRock's Larry Fink predicts that by 2030, data centers will use 30 times more power than a single city.
Where's that power going to come from? Are we going to take it off the grid? What does it mean for elevated energy prices for everybody else if it's that? I think it's going to represent some huge societal questions that we have not addressed, the negative side. Forget about the use of it, but just the generation of it is massive power.
One organisation, Climate Emergency UK, has introduced scorecards, a league table to compare the progress of councils. It brings both pressure and opportunity.
Environmentalism creates the idea that a local councillor is a planet saver. And of course, there are organisations that, like the UK 100, that are going to flatter people in that position. They're going to indulge those people and say how important they are, whereas most of the rest of the public are going to probably see them and say, what the hell are you doing?
Ben Pyle emphasises that such organisations are not grassroots initiatives.
Civil society has been bought and it's been organised around the interests of its billionaire philanthropists.
Newspapers and television also consistently push the same story.
We've been hearing about the threat of climate change for decades, but now we can't ignore it.
Here, the climate crisis is very real, and it is getting worse.
What mainstream media does in following this narrative is that they exclude vast areas of climate science. They exclude all the sceptical scientists. By the BBC, which has done it for 20 years, saying that you cannot have any other view apart from the settled narrative, is doing an enormous disservice to science.
Journalists and broadcasters are schooled in the carbon doctrine by organisations such as the Carbon Literacy Project, which claims to have trained 1,000 BBC employees. Meanwhile, Sky joined forces with the psychologists of the Behavioural Insights team to produce this initiative: How the Power of Television Can Nudge Viewers to Decarbonise Their Lifestyles. The recommendations included:
give green content more screen time, more salience in plots and scenes. Use kids' content to encourage positive environmental behaviours amongst children and their parents.
How then can we possibly expect impartiality in reporting? Rather, we're served with propaganda, statements that nobody seems willing or able to question.
It is unequivocal that human activities are responsible for climate change.
I can take current media and almost any climate story I can write, I think, a very effective counter. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. This is endemic to a media that is ill-informed and has an agenda. The agenda is to promote alarm and induce governments to decarbonize. There's an organization called Covering Climate Now, which is a nonprofit membership organization. Their mission is to promote the narrative. They will not allow anything to be broadcast or written that is counter to the narrative.
Among the 500 plus media partners on the Covering Climate Now website are Reuters, Bloomberg, ABC, CBS, MSNBC, NBC, Channel 4 News, The Guardian, The Daily Mirror and The Lancet, as well as several British universities. Funders of Covering Climate Now have included the Rockefeller Family Fund, the Rockefeller Family and Associates, and the One Earth Fund.
It's true that the mainstream media only report one side of the story and that most of them are in the pocket of the powerful people who are trying to implement these changes. I don't question that at all. But it's also true that people are listening to them less and less and reading them less and less. We see independent media people with much larger audiences than mainstream papers. And I think that phenomenon will gather pace now.
That rise in independent voices has seen institutions like the UN, the WEF, big tech companies and broadcasters like the BBC wage war on what they call mis, dis and malinformation. They don't appreciate views they can't control. A partisan media, obsessed local councils, and then there are the universities, which should be the first and last bastions of objective research and open debate. But here too is a story of outside pressure.
With the drop in government funding, the shortfall has been made up from other sources, and those tend to be NGOs, private organisations. For example, the Gates Foundation and the Wellcome Trust. Invariably, money from private organisations will come with vested interests.
These vested interests, according to Professor Moss, drive university teaching towards business goals and ideologies at the expense of critical thinking and levels of academic achievement. One new initiative is the European Network on Climate and Health Education, led by Glasgow University. Medical students have been trained to accept that climate science is an established fact.
Increasingly, climate change is harming people's health. You could say it's the largest health emergency of our time, and I do need to be ready to help tackle this challenge.
Can the outcomes really be free of prejudice when the backers include the WHO and major pharmaceutical companies?
This new collaboration will help train the next generation of medics with the skills they need to treat the health impacts of climate change and deliver more sustainable healthcare.
That's why health leaders from across the public and private sectors are coming together to support this transformative new network.
Academics, right from the beginning now, are socialised to orientate their research towards the money. So this, I think, is quite damaging when it comes to fearlessly pursuing the truth wherever it may lead. That doesn't really happen anymore in academia. It's more about pursuing the money, wherever that might lead.
It makes me feel distraught. It makes me feel that the whole purpose of university learning has been subverted.
We feel too afraid to have kids because we feel that we're heading towards civilization breakdown.
People under the age of 35 are more likely to report climate change as a reason not to have children.
I've decided not to have kids to do my part for climate change.
If I don't think the future is worth anything, then I'm not going to have children. If I think it is worth something, I will have children.
I think these ideas have spread like bad viruses, and there's been a lot of investment in promoting some extraordinarily weak ideas.
General population cannot fathom the psychopathy of the vision that they're facing. So they can't fathom that a group of people would organize and engineer this kind of mass atrocity to get where they want to go.